You're listening to the Packernet Podcast Network.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to It's Always Draft Season Podcast, part of the Packernet Podcast Network. Jake Shavink here with you guys on this lovely Wednesday. Not too long until draft time, so I think you should expect, quite a few episodes. I know we've been slacking for sure, but yeah, it's going to be packed on the feed for the next 7-8 days. So make sure you're tuned in. Make sure you're listening to all the shows and episodes on the feed for Packernet. It's going to be a busy time over the next week and a half, 2 weeks. So get excited. Get excited. We're almost there. We've almost reached the finish line. So on today's show, the plan here is we're going to scout all of Green Bay's pre-draft visits. And by pre-draft, I mean the pre-draft 30, right? You call it the top 30 if you want to. But we're going to go through all those that have been reported and just kind of talk about the games of all the guys, dive into the RAS, dive into all the raw numbers, some of the PFF stuff, and then kind of work through scouting reports. So that's going to be fun. Got a lot to check off there in terms of going through these guys. So strap in. But first, I want to do this because Peter Schrager dropped his initial 2024 mock draft. He usually drops one or two before the festivities. So what I want to do is go through that really quickly, just because the reason I want to do it is because I remember Peter Schrager dropping a mock draft in 2016, and this was like probably the third year I think that I was like really deep into the draft world in terms of prospects, at least for a few rounds of it, not 300 to 400 players necessarily, but like knew enough about like the players themselves to kind of go, okay, this is interesting, this is an interesting fit. And I remember Schrager comes out in 2016 and has Carl Joseph going 14th to the Raiders and Keanu Neal going 17th to the Falcons. And I remember my reaction and most others' reaction going, wow, that's kind of wild, because we had thought at the time those safeties were more in that 40 to 60 range and not really like, top 20 picks that we thought that was very, very wild. Turns out those were both 100% correct. And so now it's like, okay, Schrager definitely can throw his own flair on some of the mock drafts. There's no doubt about it. And you can kind of go back and look at all of his previous ones if you want to look them up. I'm not going to dive deep into like all of them necessarily. But what we're going to do is quickly look through the 2024 version, right? His 1.0, and we're gonna go back on some previous ones, see what he thought with Green Bay. But just like he definitely has sources and within some teams, and I think it's a mock draft worth looking at. Now, top of the draft I think is very, very similar to what a lot of people have. I think it's consensus right now is obviously Chicago goes Caleb Williams. That's very clear. Washington Commanders going Jaden Daniels at 2. I think I buy it. I do. I think that's pretty much been the sentiment. I think there's been a couple things kind of, leak out, whether it be Brian Kelly or, what have you, that, it seems like Washington likes Jaden Daniels a lot. Could be smoke. We're almost now into the phase where what you're hearing is more truthful than what you've probably heard the last 6-ish weeks. Usually what you hear in January and what you hear in, 7-8 days out from the draft is much more reliable than what you hear, during, the combine period and the free agency period. That's pretty much been backed up and proven to be true. So Jaden at 2, Drake May at 3 to the Patriots. Be interesting to see if New England actually does this or trades down. Maybe they do trade down if May is the pick at 2. That seems, the most likely thing they do if Williams and May are off the board. Just because of who the front office is with Elliott Wolf and all these guys, I feel like Jane Daniels isn't going to be their cup of tea. I think they want, more size, more frame at the quarterback position, right? They want a denser frame playing quarterback. So I do imagine that is possibly what we see if that happens. But with Drake May falling there, I feel like they're going to take May. I kind of agree with that. Those first three, I feel like pretty locked in overall. After that, it gets interesting. Has the Giants trading up 2 spots to select J.J. McCarthy? Will the Giants be able to, move into a spot that can, get them ahead of teams like the Vikings, the Broncos? It feels like the Raiders aren't the trade-up team. And I've mentioned this before, probably on here and on, some of the live stuff I do, like that if the Raiders could go get Jaden Daniels, I think they would go get Jaden Daniels. I think that's in your scenario where Williams, May are 1-2, and New England doesn't want Daniels. They'll gladly move down with the Raiders or maybe Minnesota. But the Raiders, I feel like, would be very comfortable going up and getting him. But in this scenario, of course, back to it, the Giants going up to get McCarthy, throwing a third-round pick and next year's second-rounder. But, yeah, McCarthy to the Giants, it feels like, they're going to probably have to start over at some point. But McCarthy, yeah, very polarizing. We'll definitely be talking about him very, very soon. Marvin Harrison goes 5th to the Chargers. Rome Odunze to Arizona in a trade back. Tennessee takes Joe Alt. That's obvious. Falcons going Dallas Turner for sure. The Colts coming up to 9 with Chicago to draft Malik Neighbors. Yeah, count me in on that. That would be awesome. You get Pittman, you get Neighbors, you get Downs, you get Pierce with Anthony Richardson at the helm. I know we haven't seen a ton from Anthony Richardson, but you saw, a lot of the flashes, a lot of the highs that you saw on the Florida film that gets you really excited, and to have Neighbors on that team in an offense that is going to prioritize, some vertical shot plays and over the middle. And imagine Malik Neighbors running slot fades in Indianapolis would be kind of awesome. I think Brock Bowers to the Jets feels very likely at this point. We've been so locked in on the Jets going tackle at 10 or positionally flexible offensive lineman like Troy Fautanu that just feels like Bowers just makes a lot of sense. Like I get it, Jeremy Ruckert, right? There's still a glimmer of hope there because it's a tight end position and it takes a while. But like Brock Bowers would be pretty insane. Terry Arnold to Minnesota, Latu Latu to Denver, Olu Fashanu to Vegas, Taliesa Fuanga to the Saints, J.C. Latham to the Bears in the trade back. That's interesting. Could play guard, could play tackle. In that trade back, Fautanu goes to Seattle, Quinyon Mitchell to Jacksonville, Byron Murphy to the Bengals, Tyler Guyton to the Rams, Brian Thomas Jr. to Pittsburgh, Jared Verse to Miami. That's something that's not it's not really very common at all. They lost Wilkins in free agency. They Chubb, I think, got hurt. I know Phillips did. Right, so they're dealing with a lot of injury on the edge, and they lost Van Ginkel as well. That's an interesting one. Cooper DeJean to Philly, Bo Nix to Minnesota, so they get Nix and Terry Arnold. Xavier Worthy to Dallas. Look out. I'm going to skip Green Bay for a second. We're going to go Graham Barton to Tampa Bay, Darius Robinson to Arizona. Darius Robinson's starting to get that late steam again. Adonai Mitchell to Buffalo. Love that. Zach Frazier to Detroit. That makes a lot of sense with the potential of Frank Ragnow potential retirement. He's dealt with a lot of injuries. They did lose Jonah Jackson. Baltimore gets Kool-Aid McKinstry. That's very Baltimore. Just get a quality player. Ladd McConkey to the Niners, and then Jalen Polk to the Chiefs. That's interesting. That is interesting. There's been some late buzz on him as well. And there's late buzz on another guy we're going to talk about when we go through the Packers visits and all that. But the Packers at 25 take Georgia tackle Amarius Mims. So Amarius Mims, really quick, he's 6'7" and 3/4, 340. 36 and a quarter inch arm length. Like that's kind of absurd. So very much outside of the thresholds of what Green Bay normally does at offensive tackle. Now they, it's what they have done. It doesn't mean it's going to necessarily continue, but we've kind of operated under that umbrella with that offensive line and what Green Bay does there. But they also haven't had many opportunities to get some of the really talented, bigger offensive linemen in recent drafts. So it's kind of like the wide receiver thing, right, with Green Bay, where it's like, oh, they won't take wide receiver in round one. Well, they tried to move up in 22 to go get some of the guys, right? Presumably, Olave, Wilson, guys like that, and it just didn't happen. They probably liked they liked Jefferson. They probably liked Ayuk as well in 2020. Didn't get either of those guys. So that could be the thing at tackle. Could not, but I found it interesting. But to look back at Schrager's previous mocks to see what else he did for Green Bay, there's definitely a theme, and I actually wasn't expecting it to be the theme. He did have the Packers taking Jackson Smith and Jigba last year. He did a mock before the Rodgers trade and after. It was Smith and Jigba both times. He actually had the Jets taking Van Ness, which is interesting, right? They did take a pass rusher and Will McDonald in the first. Would kind of make sense to where, a lot of people were talking about maybe the Jets really wanted Van Ness and they kind of pivoted to their next pass rusher on the board. Very possible. But the JSN thing for Green Bay obviously doesn't materialize there. In 22, he had Green Bay moving up for Chris Olave, so another receiver, but it did seem like that had more smoke than JSN to Green Bay. I think everybody was kind of like, oh, they should be taking a receiver, so they got to take JSN. This one was more like, yeah, Green Bay was trying to move up to get receivers. Olave was presumably one of them. So that was interesting. They gave up 22 and 53 to move up to, I believe, 14. Yeah, 14 to get Chris Olave before the expected drop-off, which was what was written in Schrager's mock. And then at pick 28 had them taking Devin Lloyd. So right position, wrong player there with Lloyd. Obviously turned out to be Quay Walker, but he did have Quay Walker going 21st to the Patriots in the mock. So, he definitely has, put a lot of the first-round players and gotten a lot of them in. As, you look at quarterbacks, a lot of the late risers. He had Seen in there. He had Tyler Smith in there. Dax Hill, and I believe Seen was a first-round pick as well to round out the night. Could be incorrect. But still had Pickett in the first. So, he has gotten a lot of the correct players. It's obviously a lot tougher to match team and player. So, in 2021, he had Green Bay taking Elijah Moore. So not great there. It's a theme. As I said, it's definitely a theme. That Schrager had Green Bay taking receiver a lot of times, but again, so did most people in a lot of those mocks. So in 2020, it was Green Bay taking Kenneth Murray, the linebacker from Oklahoma, who went 4 picks earlier. 3 picks earlier. Hold on, I'm looking now because I want to make sure I get this correct. But it was Kenneth Murray. Green Bay picking at, where are we? 27 here. Projected trade with Seattle. So they did have him. So that's interesting. He had the Packers moving up a few spots, which they did do. Obviously not to take Kenneth Murray, to take Love, but that's interesting that he had him trading up in that scenario. He did have, Patrick Queen to Baltimore, Jefferson to Minnesota. So there were some that he nailed for sure in this mock, but that's interesting that he had Green Bay moving up a few spots because they did do that. Now Murray was already off the board. Chargers moved up 14 spots in that draft from 37 to 23 with New England to make that pick, but that was a little more intriguing there. So he's had linebacker and receiver really. for Green Bay. This time it's offensive tackles. So, just a fun little thing there. See if it materializes, of course. Marius Mims getting a lot of love in terms of like projection and what the ceiling could be at offensive tackle. We're going to get into that now as we move to the main event of the pod here. Scouting the Packers pre-draft visits, the non-combine Senior Bowl, Shrine Bowl, Hula Bowl visits, right? They've had them in for a visit. I didn't know whether to include the Northwestern linebacker. There's just conflicting stuff. I feel like I keep seeing both things, that it was a visit, but also no, it was the local pro day. We're just going to leave him out. We're going to leave the Northwestern linebacker out of it. But I want to hit the first couple. Let's start with Marius Mims, just because we just finished talking about him as the potential pick in Schrager's mock. First off, Marius Mims, I already mentioned these 6'7" and 3/4, 340 with 36 1/4 inch arm length, 9.57 RAS. Really tremendous athlete at 340. Carries 340 insanely well as well, by the way. Like, that is well documented. You see him walking around the combine. You see him doing drills. You even see him on film. He just looks like he's not carrying 340, right? So he's obviously carrying it very well, has a great body type to carry 340 and also be a tremendous athlete playing offensive tackle. Now, he has 803 total snaps, 8 starts. So, didn't start as much in 22. Injury in 23 kept him from, I think really letting everybody know how good he could potentially be. Right? I think if he played the full season, talking about him a lot more, potentially in that upper echelon of tackles in this class, where it was like, oh, look at, how well he did in a lot of big moments, right? Played some big games, SEC title game, what have you, right? He played, I think, 11 snaps in that SEC championship game. So, and 2 of his, games this past season, Tennessee, Martin, and Ball State. So only faced Alabama for a few snaps, and then 3 SEC games against Tennessee, Mississippi, and South Carolina. The grades are pretty good. He's had over an 80 pass blocking grade his last 2 years. Obviously, just, we're looking at in the ballpark of 682 snaps the last 2 seasons. But again, over an 80 pass blocking grade. The run blocking took a little bit of a dip in 23 from 22, but the grades are solid across the board. And I think 5 pressures is all he's given up in 339 opportunities. So that's pretty good there in terms of pass protection. What do you see on film with Marius Mims? Obviously, you see him oozing athleticism. I think, I see impressive linear explosiveness. I think he's an urgent and extremely effective mover to the second level, out in space. He's a good puller, has range to get to, target zones no matter where they are. He can be devastating when he, can finish, right? You see him, pancake guys downfield. And guys are, I'd be afraid of him moving in space, right? Like, he is just the amount of force he can generate with that type of momentum that he has. Insane stuff there. Force generated, insane power in the run game and in space. Put that down. He flashes reach blockability at 340, which is tough to do. He has the power to uproot and displace defensive linemen while also holding the point of attack against edge defenders. Flashes impressive spacing, balance, and hand usage when arriving at contact. Shoulder square, you get your knees bent, you have good strike positioning, and you have the size and frame to, absorb the bull rush. Active. I think he needs to be more active with his hands, but when he gets a good strike in there and he can anchor and he can, survive that initial onslaught with his size, you see really good reps in pass protection, locking rushers down out there. Good anchor skill set, especially, against rushers who consistently are converting that speed and explosiveness into power. As for weaknesses, I think the mirror skills and his quicks in terms of changing direction, in an urgent manner in pass protection, I think is lacking a bit. He can definitely lose to twitched up rushers that have, a good inside move. Sometimes he can allow them to win the outside track, but it's more about, losing inside moves than it is getting beat around the arc. His hand placement does need to get better. He has good strike timing, but he's still wide in terms of, where he places his hands. And really, like, the hand usage is just generating that type of pop, I think, with what is impressive about him. He's still wide in terms of, like, grabbing the shoulder pads. He gets a little bit outside the frame of rushers. So when he's arriving at contact, you want to see those hands in tight, your elbows down, not looping your arms around to catch guys. That's important at the next level. It's going to be different than the collegiate game. I think he needs to balance the aggressiveness and control in the run game a little bit more. I think, he fires off the ball well, right? Good linear explosiveness. We kind of talked about that, and he's devastating. He can generate a ton of power. But there are times where he just a little bit out of control, and I think that, that's something that you can curb a little bit of, like, you'd like to see that aggressiveness in the run game, and I think it's easier to curb it than try to unlock it out of somebody. So that's another thing in the weakness department. I think he could get better squaring his shoulders in both phases consistently. That'll drastically help the development track for sure. When you're squaring your shoulders well in pass pro especially, and in the run game, you're going to deliver better hits. You're going to deliver, better strikes with your hands because your shoulders are square. So, like, that's going to get, a lot better if that is fixed early in the development cycle for him. And just obviously 8 starts total at Georgia. So he's got the high ceiling. Experience is necessary. Would he redshirt? Maybe he would. In Green Bay, it's a possibility. I know there's been talk about Tom moving to center. That would potentially leave, right tackle open for Mims. But if you want to redshirt him, would not be opposed to that. All right, let's move on here to Oklahoma offensive tackle and very popular mock draft selection, Tyler Guyton. So Tyler Guyton listed at 6'7" 3/4 as well, 322 pounds. That's at least a little closer to the range of what Green Bay normally does on the offensive line side of things. 34 and an 1/8 inch arm length. That's really good. And a 9.71 RAS. So another tremendous athlete at the position in Tyler Guyton. Again, as I mentioned, one of the favorites at pick 25 right now in terms of another ceiling play like Mims, just, with this, the thresholds and the size, measurements closer to what Green Bay likes. So for Guyton, what I have, obviously a tremendous athlete at the tackle position. I think he has that potential versatility and comfort to play on both sides of the offensive line. Great quicks. I think he's got really nice footwork to mirror and recover in pass protection. You see his pass sets look really, really strong. He can quick set. He can get out there 45-degree angle. He can get into that vertical set. And he's really controlled, but he's also urgent in doing so. So he's got that, controlled urgency when he gets into his sets. That's really helpful. That's going to set you up for success, early in the rep, which is huge. And that plays to how good the athleticism really is, functionally. So, he can recover well in pass protection too with that footwork. He's pretty good at getting to his landmarks as a second level blocker. Obviously gets to his landmark well in pass sets. Pretty impressive mover in space as a puller. He passes off stunts really well in pass pro. The one thing he does really well, and he still is working on the hand placement stuff, but I do see, active hands. He's still not somebody where, I'd look at him and go, the strike timing is good and the placement's good. It's more of like, okay, when he realizes he doesn't have good hand placement and he's kind of missing the mark there, he still has the active hands and he's fighting for leverage and positioning. When rushers are trying to counter or win against him in pass pro, that's good news. Right, you like to see that, but you also obviously want to see, him give up his chest less. He's definitely one of those guys who loops and bear hugs very, very often. He definitely flashes reach block ability, good extension and pass pro at the point of attack as well. Right, that's really important too. Keep guys away from your frame. Another part of the game where it's like, okay, keep guys away from your chest. Right, make sure you're in a good position at contact to win your rep. He's another guy very much in the same vein of Mims, where can occasionally lose the inside move, control the aggressiveness in the initial push in the run game in 1v1s, can lose his balance, and mentioned already the hand placement. So Guyton and Mims are very, very similar. I think Mims is a better mover. I think Guyton has better feet and pass pro. Two guys who have a lot of ceiling to work with. There's a lot of projection in terms of where they could be in a couple years. Very much Green Bay type of home run swings, right? How Goody likes to operate in that department, at least. But also guys who could, in theory, redshirt if that's something Green Bay would like to see. Now, obviously, Guyton closer to the size thresholds than Mims, but I do think they are pretty similar players overall. Now, Zach Zinter, another one coming in here on the offensive line, right guard from Michigan. He has a lot of experience. The opposite of Amarius Mims, some would say. So for him, he has 2,511 snaps at right guard in his career. Grades are pretty solid the last two seasons, over 73.5 in pass blocking the last 2 years, and 74.9 and above in run blocking. So a really solid player in both phases of things. He's just given up 2 sacks and 14 pressures the last 2 seasons. So pretty good efficiency marks there. Zinter is 6'5" and 7/8", 309. 33.5-inch arm length. Are obviously no RAS applicable. Dealing with injury, right? Broke his leg in the Ohio State game. So does he play at 309? Does he play more like 315? That's a great question. Probably something he answered in the visit. So with Zinter, I think there's a good amount to like. I think he's a smooth mover. He's got quick feet and pass pro. He's another player who's a little more inconsistent with the hand usage, but he fights really well for positioning. He does play a little bit high at contact, but he's obviously, a taller guy. He's a taller guy at 6'5" and 7/8. So, I think the big thing for him is just going to continue to work on bending your knees well and being really balanced and effective at contact. Make sure you're, timing up strikes really well. That's going to help him a lot. He can play really aggressive, right? When in terms of looking for work, when he doesn't have an assignment, he does a really nice job being aggressive and controlled and getting guys on the ground. I think he can get to the second level well. He can do that. He can pull. He's a good enough athlete to be involved in the run game in that capacity. I just think that he, might fit better in power than in zone. Not saying he can't hit the landmarks and do a lot of that stuff, but he just might be a better player for power concepts. And inside zone might be good enough though for him. And that's like Green Bay might be moving more to that. You have the Jacobs-Dillon pairing now, so that's something to monitor with Zinter, where it's like he is really, really solid across the board. I think he can lose to some quicker and more explosive rushers, but like overall, he's really rock solid. I think he can come in and be, a starter right away, develop into a quality starter. It's just, again, the pad level, I think, is potentially the biggest thing with him, really. And I think that's, something that good offensive line coaches can work on with him once he gets in the building. Let's go to defensive tackle with Michael Hall Jr. So Michael Hall Jr. goes to the Senior Bowl. He's in the 280s, right? He weighs in the 280s. It's kind of like, all right, he's more undersized pass rusher type. Then he comes to the pro day at 6'2 and 3/4, 299. That is significant for sure. 33.5-inch arm length and a 9.56 RAS. In terms of what PFF has to say, had an 84.8 pass rush grade this past season, 29 pressures, 2 sacks. I will say he had 3 pressures against Michigan, noteworthy for sure. 4 against Penn State, so they're 2 of their bigger games. He showed up big in those. He does have a 15.4% missed tackle rate, which, I think just a few games here and there where he struggled to tackle, but like overall it wasn't, a season-long prolonging issue. In terms of, Michael Hall's game, I think there's a ton to like. He's wicked quick. He's got the functional twitch as a pass rusher to where he's going to be disruptive. He's going to win against a lot of guys in front of him just because he's that much quicker, that much more agile. And what I think he does a really good job of is winning with that first step explosiveness and the agility, but also doing a good job combining that with quick, well-placed strikes. Either he goes to his club arm over move, or he shoots his hands really quickly to convert some of that explosiveness into power, kind of surprise offensive linemen with that pop that he can generate. And then he has the ability to push the pocket. So he's got 2 really strong moves, and he sets up that club arm over move with a really, really good jab step. And so like those 2 moves, so if he can do those things, I think it shows you that there's a track for development into, becoming a very, very advanced pass rusher in terms of the moves that he can eventually have in the repertoire. So that's, really good news there. He's still a really young player too. He's like 20, 21 years old, somewhere in there. I don't know if he's 21 just yet. He's effective with looping on stunts, right? He's got that flexibility. He's got good burst on a more curvilinear, track when he does that. He's got really good range and closing burst in the run game. He can pursue really well from the backside. He plays with a really, really impressive motor. His ability to, generate the good extension at the point of attack with his length, using that length to his advantage, has good vision and has flashed the ability to stack and shed offensive linemen against the run. Obviously, we talked about the closing burst. He definitely does a nice job with a well-timed strike with his hands when offensive linemen get too aggressive firing off the ball. So he gets guys on the ground really well there and opens the door to make plenty of plays against the run. However, his work defending the run, those flashes are flashes for a reason, right? He's not going to handle double teams. He can still get driven off the ball by singular blockers if he doesn't shoot his hands quick enough. So that's something to generate more consistency shooting your hands, because he can do it and he's shown it. But I do think there needs to be improvement there in terms of the consistency. Now, I do think with Michael Hall as well, you see him lose on a lot of reps where he gets matched well when he tries the bull rush, and so he can get stuck. And so he's got to be able to work out of contact better and be able to counter quicker. That's something that I think will come with time and development as well. So I do think Michael Jr. is an impressive prospect in the defensive tackle class, and I think, with that jump up in weight to 299, I think it's somebody Green Bay should at least consider for sure. Christian Boyd, interesting one on the defensive line as well, from Northern Iowa, 6'2 and 5/8, 325, 31 and 5/8 inch arm length. He did post without the bench, which I should have added the bench to the RAS, but his RAS was like in the 3s, which is not ideal at defensive tackle, right? Would have liked to see that elite athleticism show up. However, with Christian Boyd, I do think you see a lot to like. I'm going to pull up his PFF thing really quick here. Obviously, the level of competition is your biggest question. That's understandable. He consistently grades out well in run defense. He's got 3 years of grades above 84 in terms of overall defensive grade, and he's got 4 years of 5 above 80. Now, his pass rush grade finally jumped up big time in 2023, jumped it to an 89.4, had 40 pressures and 3 sacks. 24 run stops, which is, those stops are considered a failure for the offense. So, right, when you look at like early down success, like a 1-yard run, a 2-yard run, those are not successful plays, which I think that's a good benchmark to look at. He's not a bad tackler, but he's not the best. So that's something worth noting. And I do think at 325, I think you can see nose tackle potential out of him. I do think he needs to have better positioning to handle double teams. Still something that's a work in progress. I think the pad level needs to be a little bit lower. Needs to generate better extension at the point of attack. But he can unload with a bull rush. He can push pull. He can, kind of push pull, swim, arm over. He has some moves as a pass rusher. He can stay engaged pretty well on the move. He can set, he can sit and leverage in a single gap. He's at 325. You'd like to see him 2-gap more, but he can definitely 1-gap if asked to do so. He's the type of player who could generate a ton of force in terms of disrupting the run game, right? He can drive guys back into the lap of the running back and really be a disruptive force in that regard. As a pass rusher, he still has that. I know functionally, like, the athleticism isn't the best on film, right? Changing direction, closing burst, all of that. But the way he plays is with a ton of power at the point of attack. And that's what's going to get him, a lot of reps at the NFL level, a lot of snaps, right? Earning that is going to be with the power. Holding the point of attack if you're 1-gapping, right? Generating some power as a pass rusher, showing off those moves. Like, those are the things that I think are going to make him a good player immediately. If he can develop better pad level, work on the hand usage, he's going to be, a potential stud on the interior, playing some nose tackle, some 1-tech, and also some 3-tech. He can be, maybe more flexible in how he's deployed along the defensive line. So let's take a break really quick, and we'll come back and kind of probably roll at a little bit of a faster pace through the rest of these. But yeah, we'll take a break. We'll be right back.
We all have smartphones, and we all know they're pretty amazing, but they also can be amazingly distracting, especially when we're around other people. So US Cellular wants us to reset our relationship with our phones by putting down our phones for $5. That's right, a company that sells phones wants us to put down our phones. And to see what we find, learn more at uscellular.com/built for us.
Have you ever experienced turbulence on a flight and wondered why?
And you can see all the terrain around you. You've got no issue with visibility or anything?
No, everything's peachy.
Maybe you've sat on the tarmac for hours wondering why your plane isn't moving.
Well, we're outside here. They're saying the ramp is closed. They won't let us park because of Air Force One.
Listen in on the conversations between pilots and air traffic controllers on the Air Traffic Out of Control podcast.
510 declaring an emergency. There's smoke in the cabin. I need to make a landing right now on 31 left.
We have the most interesting, wild, and funny ATC recordings you will ever hear. Check out Air Traffic Out of Control wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.
The first taste of rare bourbon you finally got your hands on. That's nice. At Caskers.com, we make this experience easy. Caskers is a one-stop spirit curator with an impressive selection of exclusive, sought-after, rare, and household names in the realm of premium spirits and champagne. Discover the top flavors of the year now by going to Caskers.com and using code WELCOME10 for $10 off your first purchase. Get $10 off your first purchase with code WELCOME10 at Caskers.com.
All right, guys, back here on It's Always Draft Season Pod, going through the Packers pre-draft visits and their scouting reports. So let's go to the last defensive tackle on the list really quick here and go to Mason Smith from LSU. Mason Smith, 6'5" and an eighth, 306 and an 8.38 RIS. He is a junior. He is still a young player with the potential to unlock a ceiling and develop well in the league. Did have an injury in 2022, only played 8 snaps, and I think there's, potential that you're looking at 2023 as, okay, he was still working back from that injury. He still tackled well and had a pretty good pass rush grade. His tackling grade was 82, 76.5 pass rush grade, 23 pressures, 3 sacks, 13 run stops. The grades game to game in 2023, not the best, other than like tackling well and have a few good games as a pass rusher here and there. I do think Mason Smith was lauded as, this high athleticism, immense ceiling prospect. I think there's still there is still a ceiling he can unlock. I do think athletically, I was expecting a lot more on film, I'll be honest. I was expecting to see, this tremendous, mover in terms of the closing burst, in terms of the agility. Nah, he definitely plays like a defensive tackle. It's not like he's not as twitched up as somebody like Michael Hall, that's for sure. He's another guy who definitely needs to work on pad level. Like, he is playing very high at the point of attack when he's rushing the passer. Either way, both phases, pad level must improve. He has some push-pull. He can generate some power as well off the snap, but he is definitely a player who rises up too high just immediately off the snap, and that's something that's going to have to get better. That power works as a pass rusher. It works to defend the run, to stack and shed. I do think he needs better gap discipline and better vision against the run. He's playing a little out of control a little bit, but he does have those reps where he does a nice job, getting off a block and making a play, but just need more consistency. I think overall, more consistency is necessary. He's probably a day 3 pick, maybe a day 2 pick if some team really likes the idea of him being a young player who can ascend. But I do think there's a lot of work to do with Mason Smith. I want to do more guys, but I feel like I'm going to be here for 2 hours if we go through all of these guys super in depth. We'll give a little more than an elevator pitch, but yeah. Okay, so we're going to move to edge, right? We're going to move to defensive end. Let's start with Marshawn Kneeland, who's supposedly going to be in this week. Maybe he already has been this week, but there was talk about him visiting very soon. 6'3", 267, a 9.08 RAS at defensive end. Be careful, the 9.54 RAS is at defensive tackle, just to let you know there. Grades are pretty strong this past season, 37 pressures, 6 sacks, 84.7 pass rush grade, 83 run defense grade. He's been over 83 in run defense the last 2 years. So 35 run stops and 59 the last 2 seasons. So, this is a powerful player who sets a strong edge. He can win around the arc by, using his hands well. That's something of note. But he is just not a player who's getting driven off the ball very consistently because he's obviously bigger at 267. And I think he did a pretty good job in terms of, kind of dominating the competition when he played, the MAC. But he had a 5 pressure, 1 sack game against Iowa. I think that matters. So in terms of stacking and shedding against the run, he does a really nice job. He has pretty good, closing burst. He has pretty good agility for his size. You can see him change direction pretty efficiently for a defensive end. Obviously, explosion to power is his game. He was lined up a lot, I think. Let me double check. Where he had a lot of snaps outside the tackle, but he definitely had plenty of snaps where he looked like he wasn't being allowed to attack as much, and that's something he's going to be able to, as a defensive end, play that speed to power game a little bit if he's outside the tackle a lot. But it just seemed like he was asking in a lot of run defense reps where he was just, all right, sidestep, right, do your job in the run game, which he is really effective there, right? He taking on pullers, like generating good collisions and not giving up ground, being disruptive. He has all that. And the speed to power, the hand usage that he can do to kind of flatten his angle to the quarterback on the outside arc is really impressive at 267. I really like him. There's a report about, Brugler has him 32nd on the big board. There's some teams that really like Kneeland and might, pick him earlier than expected. Obviously, he fits Green Bay really well. Detroit's another one that could make a lot of sense there. maybe Baltimore. So that's something to monitor for sure with Nealand. But in terms of like profile and what he does well and how he'd fit, this is tier 1 to me. This is like as good as it gets in terms of the fit. So one more here that we got to talk about in terms of like edge rusher. It feels like this is kind of the same thing as Will McDonald visiting last year, if you remember that. Austin Booker from Kansas. 6'4.5", 240, a 705 RAS, not the best RAS there, but had a pretty strong year. 38 pressures, 9 sacks. Doesn't have a lot of career snaps, by the way. And, that's something that is very noteworthy. He's on the all-inexperienced team for sure. But a 38 pressure, 9 sack, 34 run stop season, really impressive. He's one that you look at the RAS and you go, that's not right. The only reason you would say that is because of how impressive he looks on film. Like the first step explosiveness. I do think there are some false steps though. He does a nice job, with kind of working some tempo in there. Coming off the line, working like he guys who work the Euro step right can kind of come off the ball a little bit slower and then use that burst in tempo to, win inside move or win around the arc. And that's something that Booker does well as a pass rusher. I believe he, uses what he can as his length to his advantage in terms of, stacking and shedding against the run, right? He's got the vision for it. He's got the burst and does a really nice job getting into position, defending the run. Now, that explosiveness, that power that he can unlock, he's got a nice spin move. Like he has a lot in terms of a pass rusher that's really, really exciting out there. Obviously, functional strength is something that's going to matter for him in terms of defending the run, but he looks comfortable dropping in coverage, right? Like he's a fluid athlete in that regard. So I think there's a lot to like with Austin Booker, for sure. 240 for Green Bay seems a little unlikely, but you never know. You never know. Maybe they like him at Sam Backer because he can drop into coverage. It's a possibility. Okay, so we have gotten those guys done there. Let's go to... Oh, we got to talk about this guy too, because we did offensive line already and we didn't mention him. But Giovanni Manu from the University of British Columbia got a little taste of the highlight film for him. Also, by the way, he's either, I think he's 6'7" and 3/8, but they listed him at 6'8", 352. Again, like Mims at 340, Manu carries 352 extremely well. So I'm really impressed with what I've seen from like his highlight stuff, where pass sets look fluid, look quick, right? He is, pancake machine out there, driving guys to the ground in the run game, right? He can really unlock the hips and generate a lot of power there. I see some anchoring ability. I see him, bend the knees, get good spacing at contact with his feet and anchor well, flat back. Like there's technique there in pass protection that's really impressive. Flashes good hand usage, but has obviously the power and the frame to pretty much absorb anybody he's playing against, right? Pretty good, explosiveness in the run game. Can get to the second level landmarks really well. I do think in the run game, he's a little over aggressive. He can sometimes get outside the frame in terms of dipping his shoulders one way, and I think that causes, the balance to be lost a little bit. But like overall, when you watch him, you see the athletic upside, you see how well he carries 352, and you go, yeah, day 3, round 6, maybe round 5. Let me take a swing there. Let me take a swing, because you might have a Jordan Mailata situation where tremendous athlete, coming from a place not many people know very well, not a lot of exposure to him until now. Like, there is that possibility. Okay, so as we transition to linebacker, so we got some linebackers. We got to talk DBs. Got to talk a couple others. Let's go Tyron Hopper first. From Missouri, 6'1 3/4", 231, and a 7.38 RAS score, so pretty solid there. I think with Hopper at 231, I was already leaning towards like, okay, this is more of a will linebacker. I think when you watch him, you watch the athleticism, you watch him use the burst that he has to scrape and get into his gap that he needs to be in the run game, some sideline to sideline range, some coverage range. Like, he should be playing further off the ball. He's not the most enforcing tackler at contact. He's kind of more of a hang on and drag guys down. There's a little bit of an inconsistency as a tackler for sure. But like, this is a linebacker who I think should be playing will. Probably not Mike linebacker. So again, just a question of Green Bay, like, well, how do they view Quay Walker? Or do they want somebody behind Quay Walker and Hopper where it's like, okay, this is our backup will. This is what we want there. Like, then I understand that for sure. I 100% get that with Tyron Hopper. Edgerrin Cooper has been talked about a lot, of course. 6'2 and an eighth, 230, and 9.1 RAS, a 4.5, 140. We've talked about him a lot, right? Like, this is a tremendous athlete playing linebacker. Ton of sideline to sideline range. Ton of range dropping into coverage. Really good change of direction skills, right? Impressive flexibility and burst in terms of like, okay, he's working around blocks, he's dipping around blocks, right, as against the run or in space. So he has that going for him. Good play recognition, good closing burst, of course. Like, there's so much to like. He overruns some plays a little bit, I think. And obviously there's the idea of, can you be a block deconstructor? Can you play, more of the traditional linebacker role defending the run rather than, trying to dip and get around blocks? Obviously he's got the athleticism to do it, but you'd like to see both. And so that's why he's, I think, more of a projected will linebacker than he is a Mike. So that's another question where Edgerrin Cooper going to be picked higher than Tyron Hopper. So you have to kind of decide on Quay Walker in that scenario for sure. Trayvon Wallace, 6'1 and an eighth, 237, a 9.33 RAS from Kentucky. I guess I didn't do a lot of PFF stats. Hopper and Wallace, the grades aren't great. Hopper, especially this past year, was pretty low across the board. He did have a better 2022. He's always been a good blitzer and pass rusher. Hopper has his time at Florida, then Missouri, but the tackling's taken a dip, and his coverage grade was not good from PFF standards in 2023. Really quick on Cooper. Obviously, he had like a 90 grade this past year, something like that. Yeah, 90.8, an 85 in coverage, 87 defending the run, 86 pass rushing. That's the other thing. Cooper does a really good job of his blitzing. Right, 27 pressures, 10 sacks, and 58 tackles. So that's good on Cooper. Not a Trayvon Wallace, not to be completely out of order, but that's where we're at right now. So yeah, Trayvon Wallace, 6'1 and an eighth, 237 and 9.33, as I mentioned. Yeah, I just feel like he's just inconsistent. Right, like at 237, I expect more of him, doing a good job getting off blocks, being the more traditional Mike linebacker. I just don't think he's super fluid in coverage. I know he tested well, but he just doesn't look like that athlete unless he's flowing downhill or kind of using some speed sideline to sideline. Doesn't look as fluid in coverage. But I even as solid of an athlete he is, I just don't think he's like a 9.33, RAS type on the field. So I think there's inconsistencies there. I think he's a pretty good tackler overall. Generates enough force there. But to me, this could be a special teamer. I do think he needs to be a Mike linebacker, though, at his size. So that's just, again, something. I just feel like he's just not consistent really in any phase at this point. And that's a little concerning for me. Okay, let's make our shift to defensive back now. We'll talk a couple of the corners first. Let's go with Jerrion Jones from Florida State. And so, like, you see his grades initially, right? And so Jerrion Jones, by the way, 5'11 and 7/8, 190 and 9.61 RAS. So, like, really good in that department, especially, 190 as a slot corner. That's a big deal. had 394 snaps in the slot this past year. That is by far the most. He was obviously majority outside corner the years prior. And the grades jumped, right? A 94 pass rush grade, 87 coverage, 90 overall, 4 pressures and 2 sacks from the slot position. 19.2% missed tackle rate, though. Had some pretty bad games tackling against Clemson and Virginia Tech. However, so he's got the 90 grade, right? He had a 94 against North Alabama and a 92 against Southern Miss. So those 2 games are really carrying the grade here. He's got like one other game above 72. I watched LSU game, I watched Clemson, and I watched Miami. I just feel like agility-wise, he just felt better like turning and running in like trail technique as a slot corner, which is not something that like intuitively is what slot corners need to be doing. Right, I think the tackling, he had 2 bad games that kind of dragging his tackling grade down, but like, I don't know. I came away pretty disappointed, honestly. I think the agility to match in coverage against slot receivers is going to be difficult for him. And so, like, you know, he might be best on the perimeter where he can just kind of like turn and run. It just felt like he just struggled a lot more than I was expecting in coverage from the slot. So I'm not super in. I'll be honest. I'm not super in on Jarrian Jones. That's just me, though. Let's go to Jaquan Shepard from Maryland. I struggled finding, measurements for him. It took a while. 6'1", 203. He's got pretty good grades this past year. 81 defense grade, 80 in coverage. Definitely an inconsistent tackler, but did a really good job against Michigan in the tackling department. Right, has pretty good tackling radius and range to kind of make tougher tackles outside of his frame, reaching out for guys, shoestring tackling. Like, he did really well against Michigan in that regard. Ohio State, not so much. And he struggled a little bit against Marvin Harrison Jr., who doesn't, right? But he seemed really comfortable turning and running, right, in a lot of bail technique. But interestingly enough, I think for him, he obviously is majority corner snaps, but he did have some snaps in the slot in the box, and he did rotate to like free safety, quote unquote, a few times. Seems like he does a good job when he's in more side saddle, when he can see the field, right? Maybe he's doing more serve technique where he's, flat in the corner route, trying to poach and pick the ball off in that scenario. But like, I do think he can play physical, he can be catch point disruptive. So I think there are things to like with Jaquan Shepard, actually. And I think he's somebody I would be very interested in an outside corner on day 3, where it just feels like he has enough requisite speed. He can drive on the ball with in breakers. So and if he tackles, like, if he can just improve the consistency game to game of tackling, like if he can tackle like he did against Michigan, I'm all in. Defending the run in space, like he does it all. So like, I was pleasantly surprised by Shepard, disappointed by Jones. But yeah, that was interesting. I was not expecting that. So the last corner, and I think is a big one we got to talk about, is Kool-Aid McKinstry. Of course, because one of the options potentially at 25, and I know that's not what people want to hear. Some people anyway. Some people are thrilled, some people don't. 5'11 and a half, 199, 7.55 RAS. Now, a 4.47, a 1.44 10-yard split. That's 99th percentile at corner. 7.55 RAS would be the lowest RAS in the first round in some time for Green Bay. That's worth noting, of course. Not a guarantee, but worth noting. Obviously, the Jones fracture is concerning, but I'm all in. I just feel like he is A, consistent, B, he just across the board is a really strong player. And like, I don't know. I think I'm going to be pretty pleased if he's the pick at 25, honestly. I just don't know. Like, I think the one thing you worry about is like that 4.47 he ran is he that fast on film? In terms of recovery, in terms of when he gets out of position, can he recover in terms of like, getting down the field vertically and closing enough space in enough time? Maybe not. However, there might not be a more patient, technically sound, fluid in transition, a lot of boring reps where he's in phase at all times. And so, like, he doesn't open up early. He is patient. He can mirror the release off the line of scrimmage well. He can, either in some soft press technique or, he can, generate some contact if you want him to. He's good at driving on the in breakers. He does a really nice job in transition with, routes on the vertical plane. And then you see, like, ball production. By the way, last 2 years of grades, 82, 79 in run defense, 81 in coverage, 75 tackling. That's 22, 23 and 88.8 grade, 83 in run defense, 78 tackling, and 87 in coverage. So, really quick, teams threw less at him in 2023. Just had 4 pass breakups. Had 16 pass breakups and an interception in 22. Tons of ball protection, good catch point timing player, disruptive in that phase of the game. And I know, like, he's not the most enforcing type of tackler. Like, he's not itching to be a part of run defense, but he does it, and he's a good wrap-up tackler. He's not, like, generating a ton of force as a tackler, but he's a good wrap-up guy. Reminds me of Xavier McKinney in that regard. McKinney's not the enforcer, but he can wrap up and make quality tackles in space in the run game when he needs to. I just feel like there's very few holes. And with how technically sound he is and how boring a lot of his reps are where nobody's open, him opposite Jair, sign me up. Sign me up. So there's my thoughts on Kool-Aid. The safeties, let's go through them really quickly. Let's go to Katan Oladapo first, from Oregon State, 6'2", 216. I've seen 8.12 RAS as a free safety. I've seen 8.3 RAS as a strong safety. I think he's probably playing strong safety. His past year was exceptional, 88 grade, 91 in run defense, 84 in coverage. Has, 26 pressures and 8 sacks in his entire career, which is pretty cool. 4 forced fumbles, had 2 of them this past year. 7 PBUs and 2 picks in 2023. A 61.3 passer rating when targeted. By the way, Kool-Aid's was 57 in 22 and 71 in 23. I know I'm jumping all over the place, but I just remembered that. With Oladapo, I think the name of the game for him is reliable tackler, really good route recognition, in coverage, whether it be a free safety, whether it be in the slot, physical player. So I do think there's plenty to like, and I think he could be a good foil to Xavier McKinney. I do really like what he brings to the table. I do have some notes. I could get to them. If I'm missing anything, I'm sure there is. Yeah, working the slot and coverage against tight ends. Wingspan increases tackle radius. Impressive tackler and enforcer near the line of scrimmage. More game speed than advertised. Can stick with some skill position guys on crossers. Flashes some range on the back end. Talked about the route recognition. Flashes ability as a blitzer. Can get into throwing lanes. Transitions are a bit inconsistent. He doesn't look as smooth all the time in transition. It's a little more inconsistent there. Obviously, I don't think he's a single high player. He can be a split field safety or a box safety. I do think he needs a better plan for staying balanced when kind of confrontation, contact happens at the top of routes. He definitely has fallen a couple times at the top of the routes when receivers are working to initiate some contact there. And I do think he kind of sticks in his pedal too long. He might be overly patient to where, like, he needs to kind of turn and run with some vertical routes a little more urgently. So I do like Oladapo though. Omar Brown, interesting one from Nebraska, because I think, we kind of put him in the vein of safety, right? But he only had 60 snaps at free safety. I do think he's a really good slot player. 6'0", 205, and a 6.57 RAS. 84 coverage grade last year. 2 pass breakups and a pick. A 62.7 passer rating when targeted. So there's I think with him, he looks comfortable, fluid, play physical football in coverage from the slot. Like, he should be there. That's his position. Don't mess with it. Feels like a really good spot for Green Bay to go, yeah, day 3, let's get a backup to Keyshawn Nixon. Let's go Omar Brown. And I think that makes a ton of sense. Chris Edmonds, Arizona State, 6'2" and 3 ace, 210, a 4.4 940, played at Samford before Arizona State. With Edmonds, I think you see the enforcer type, box safety, tackle, be that kind of guy, can handle himself in terms of recognition and range in short zones, and intermediate zones. I think he's like a very diet version of Jaden Hicks. So I do think there's something there. And I think he was a perfect guy to bring in on a visit, with a ton of speed, that he showed in the 40. Can he be the box safety? I think that him and Oladapo are very much in that vein. Akeem Dent, 5'11" and 3/4, 203 and 8.54 RAS. I'm not thrilled with Dent, just like I'm not thrilled with Jerrion Jones, to be honest. Very, very inconsistent tackler. I think he gets his eyes on the quarterback too much. He's not, as natural and instinctive in coverage. I just think there's a lot of work to be done there for him. And he didn't have a grasp on the starting role throughout 2023. I will say that. Just a few names left now as we approach the hour 5 mark. I believe there's just the offensive skill positions now, which I'm excited to talk about, of course. Let's go to our guy first here, Ray Davis from Kentucky. Last 2 seasons for Ray Davis, 2022 at Vanderbilt. He played at Temple, Vanderbilt, then Kentucky. Some wild stuff there. His last year at Vanderbilt, he had 1,044 yards, 4.5 yards per carry, 5 touchdowns. Had an 84.9 rushing grade. 55 missed tackles forced. 3.16 yards after contact per attempt. Goes to Kentucky, rushes for 1,131 yards, 5.7 yards per attempt, 14 touchdowns, 51 missed tackles forced, and 3.81 yards after contact per attempt. A 91.4 rushing grade. What I like about Davis, by the way, 5'9", 220, a 4.13 unofficial RAS, benched 25. He was, I think, in the 4.6s. In the 40, which I do think when you watch him, you're like, this is not a guy with, insane bursts and long speed where he's going to be, cashing a lot of long runs for touchdowns. He is impressively shifty. The lateral movement skills are really good. Ability to reset his feet and cut is really good. When you have to kind of string them together. He does a really, really nice job of planting the foot in the ground at full speed and be able to adjust path, which is always great to make defenders miss in space. And what I think Davis does a nice job of course, is, pad level and contact balance. Does a really nice job there. What I'm really thrilled about him doing, and I kind of went through a play of his on Twitter about this, is he does a really nice job staying patient and letting his blocks set up and manipulating defenders to where offensive linemen are getting good leverage to set up, where the lane is going to be. And that's advanced stuff for sure. Sometimes his vision, between the tackles is a little bit lacking, and he's just kind of, I don't think he's got the bounce out burst to turn the corner all the time. So he's more trying to just follow blocks, pick off what he can between the tackles in some points, and that's understandable. But I do think the vision patience combo are really good in terms of, finding lanes, setting up lanes in a lot of power concepts. I really do like him. I think the skill set is excellent. But, I think... Oh, also, forgot about this. Makes acrobatic catches as a pass catcher. I always forget that. Could be a day 3 pick. Wouldn't mind if he joined the room at all. But athletically, you're not looking at like the most impressive player there. Would probably be an outlier athleticism-wise, which there are always those. But that he would definitely be the athleticism outlier at the next level if he were to succeed. But Davis joining a committee would be very, very fun. Okay, 2 receivers, and we're done. Let's talk about Jermaine Burton first from Alabama, 6'0", 196, and 909 RAS. Jumped out of his shoes in the vert and the broad jump. The production. Let's talk about that, because when you look at, at Georgia and at Alabama, you think, oh, well, he didn't crack 800 yards ever. That's not great. What I will say is his final year at Georgia, he had 19.1 yards per reception, had nearly 17 in his first year at Bama, and then 20.5 his last year at Bama. 15 touchdowns the last 2 years at Bama. He plays outside. He plays out wide at 196, as he should be. Dynamic, plenty of burst in his release game. He's a vertical threat in all essence of the word. He can win downfield, but the leaping ability to catch point is really the selling point for me. It's like, all right, yeah, he's got the burst, he's got the plenty of straight line speed to stack defenders, right, and win vertically, but it's also like adjusting, leaping at the catch point, shielding yourself from defenders, but using that leaping ability as, a version of separation for him. I think he's developing a really strong route tree. He has the burst and quickness at the top of his routes to stay efficient in that area. With an expanding route tree like that, it's really exciting. And also production-wise, don't forget about this. His last 3 seasons, 2.39 yards per route run, 2.02 yards per route run, 2.75 yards per route run. So, like, on a per route basis, you're getting good production from Burton. Just give him some more targets, So I think that's something, very, very noteworthy. Also, a 91 drop grade. Man, talk about reliability in that regard. So, obviously, Burton, I think there's some off-field stuff that Green Bay, that's why they're meeting with him. But, like, if Green Bay wants another vertical threat in the building, Burton can definitely be that, but also be a reliable playmaker, could turn into a 3-level route runner, and obviously has so good leaping ability at the catch point. So, yeah. Last but not least, Devontae Walker, 6'1.5", 193, and 991 RAS, 40.5 in the vert, and a 4.36 40. So, obviously a tremendous athlete. When you watch him on film, the long strides, the ability to win vertically, the ability to pull away from defenders with the ball in his hands, like, that's all very clear. Flashes the catch point wins, right? He's got the vertical presence. That's his game right now. Vertical presence, and also, a good yak player. Like, that's in a straight line, right? He's not the most dynamic in the short area in terms of quicks and agility, right? But he has that impressive straight line speed. Was at Kent State before North Carolina. Came in, just played 8 games and had 700 yards and 7 touchdowns, 699 to be more exact. But he, again, averaged 17 yards per reception, 2.28 yards per route run, 18.2 ADOT. Very nice. Caught 10 of 17 contested passes his final year in college. So, there's a lot to like here in terms of the threat of him as a vertical presence. Will get corners to open up very, very often, right? And I think that's going to open up, a lot of underneath stuff, and he's going to take advantage of that with some of that, short area burst and explosiveness that he can generate in a straight line after the catch. Smoke routes are going to be, good for him. I do think his route break transitions are pretty poor right now. He's getting to 5 or 6 steps through the break point. He's struggling to gear down for a guy that fast. That reminds me of Watson a lot. So if they're looking for another Watson, they might have him here. A little bit smaller frame, but they might have him. So that's worth noting there for the two receivers. Both are vertical threats, which is, that's something Green Bay could explore if they wanted to in the draft. I'll leave you with this because I forgot to include it. Giovanni Manu from British Columbia ran under 5 seconds in the 40, a 4.96, and also jumped 33.5 in the vert, which that might be 100th percentile. Like 31 is like over 90th percentile. So 33.5 might be 100th percentile. It might. I'll be checking that. But there you go. A lot of pre-draft visits. Talked a little, Schrager mock draft and what was going on there at the beginning. Hope you guys enjoy this pod. We're going to be doing a lot of positional stuff and look at the draft as a whole over the next 7-8 days before it's go time. So hope you guys enjoyed that. If you're interested in more, got YouTube, of course, to check out. Got a live show, obviously, for the draft if you want to check that out as well. Plenty of post-draft coverage on that, too. Thank you guys for listening. Hope you enjoy your Wednesday. Remember, it is always draft season.